The Bowl of Black Ale, a short story. Gwen, sometimes Gwendolyn, but more often to people close her nickname Poppet, was raised by her grandmother, who gave her that name, Poppet, in a farmhouse far at the back of Taradale. These days the house and much of the land has been ransacked by gores and brambles, but they have not invaded the hilltop where her grandmother was buried. The old woman died quietly in her sleep when she, Gwen Poppet, was 9 years old. That morning was indelible. It was a secret that she never shared, not once. When she found her grandmother dead in bed, she didn't run for help or to fetch some adults. Not at first. At first, she sat by her grandmother's bedside for quite a while, and she looked at her and straightened the wisps of the old woman's grey hair. She didn't cry. She didn't feel anything. She kept that secret. It seemed wrong. Also, as her grandmother lay in her bed, unbreathing, eyes closed forever, Gwen Poppet looked around the room. On a high shelf there was a wooden bowl, roughly carved from oak wood, very old. She had asked about it once, and her grandmother reacted by glaring at her and warning her never to touch it or even ask about it ever again. "It's Mr. Granger's bowl," was all she was offered. Poppet asked her uncle Billy who Mr. Granger was. "Who told you about Mr. Granger?" he asked. All he would offer is, "Mr. Granger is a man from the old country." The bowl, it seemed, was from the old country. There were a few things around the house from the old country. The grandmother was strict and strange. She had a strong Hertfordshire accent, and although she was misplaced on a parcel of bad land in the colonies, she kept many of her older ways. The most onerous of her customs for Poppet was rigorous church-going. Every early Sunday morning they would be picked up by a man from further down the valley, and he would drive them to the Church of England in Woodston. It would be an occasion for crisp, clean clothes and punctilious behaviour. Her grandmother would dress her in a floral dress and put rose glow on her cheeks, and very carefully plait her hair every Sunday into a long ponytail, and she would wear bright pink shoes. The only glow in it for Poppet was meeting several other children. Some of them took their schooling by radio too. One of them was a boy named Harley. He was unpleasant. He poked out his tongue and kept frogs in his pocket. He was the only person she ever told about the bowl. He liked appalling Poppy with descriptions of how he'd watch his father butchering sheep. "My grandma," she said, "has a bowl that is for drinking human blood." Harley wanted to see it, but Poppet told him it was cursed. He asked about it often after that. Poppet would look at it high on its shelf, dusty, but she never dared touch it. When her grandmother died, she climbed up on a chair and took it down and examined it, just to feel its carving marks. She had always wanted to feel its carving marks. Inside the bowl she found an old English penny. It showed the face of an English king. She put the penny back in the bowl and returned the bowl to its place. Some of her grandmother's things from the old country were odd. The oak bowl, bouquet of birds' feathers bound together with a white ribbon, a small plaster statue of a dog with a bone. One day a woman who had known the grandmother in the old country visited. She asked the old woman if she would sing, but the old woman declined. "But you had such a sweet voice," the woman objected, and related how, back in the old country, Poppet's grandmother, in her springtime, had been a songster and folk admired her singing. Would she sing one of the old songs from Hertfordshire? The old woman declined. Poppet, who was listening, understood that her grandmother had stopped singing when they, the family, moved to Australia, and that perhaps the old songs were now out of place. Even at church, though, her grandmother's singing was restrained with no hint that, as a young woman, she had any voice of enchantment. There were a few hymns Poppet liked, and that caused her to raise her voice in chorus in church services. Her grandmother disapproved. Then she died. Poppet wondered why the stove wasn't stirred, and the tea not started. The burial was only a few days later. Local men dug the grave. The minister from Woodston couldn't attend. The service was taken, makeshift, by a young deacon who arrived late and barely knew his lines. Before he arrived, though, words were said by Gwen's Uncle Billy, who made some reminiscences and intimated that the old woman was to go to rest in the soil of a strange land. The short, rotund, bespectacled little man named Cuthbertson, whom Poppet had never met before, arrived. Poppet was going to live with Mr. Cuthbertson. It was also before the deacon arrived, and as Mr. Cuthbertson tarried, that a man turned up, seemingly on foot, and his arrival made the short dozen mourners who were waiting for the deacon to all look up. He was an old man, unkempt, with leathery, sun-worked skin, a weather-beaten jacket, shoes with no laces. He kept one eye open wider than the other, and his mouth was crooked in the same way. Poppet watched him from beside her grandmother's corpse, wrapped, no coffin, where it waited to be lowered into the land. She was watching Mr. Cuthbertson too. He looked like a man from the city. The person who stepped forward at this arrival was the woman Poppet was told was her Aunt Lillian, although she had never met her before either. This Aunt Lillian had a Hertfordshire accent, but not as heavy as Poppet's grandmother. She greeted the strange man and pointed towards the graveside. It was as the man was climbing the hill to the grave and walking towards Poppet that her Uncle Billy walked behind her and said quietly, "It's Mr. Granger," and said nothing more. The man approached, but made no acknowledgement of Poppet nor of anyone else. He went directly to the body of the old woman, and determining where her mouth might be under the swaddling, placed his forefinger to her lips. Immediately after this, hurrying, Aunt Lillian arrived from the house. With her she had the oak bowl from its high shelf and a small ale keg. Mr. Granger looked up but didn't say anything. In fact, everyone was quiet. Next, Aunt Lillian took the penny from the bowl and offered it to him. He took it and, without looking at it, put it into his jacket pocket. Then she handed him the bowl, which he accepted and held up more or less over the grandmother's corpse. Aunt Lillian lifted the ale keg and filled the bowl with black ale. With no hesitation, Mr. Granger put the bowl to his lips and drank, guzzled down the ale with an indecent thirst. He gulped it. It was as if he was parched, as if he had not had a drop of water for days. That was the most indelible memory for Gwen, for Poppet. Mr. Granger was disgusting. He slopped the bowl, slurping and chugging, and when he reached the end, his thirsty tongue went searching for the final drops. Poppet thought he was a dirty, squalid old man, and the slubbering way he drank the black ale at the graveside was vulgar. He drank with closed eyes. After drinking, he opened his eyes and smiled, slightly, more to one side of his mouth than the other, showing his broken teeth. Then he placed the bowl on the corpse, more or less on the heart. This Mr. Granger was gone, walking away, before the young deacon finally turned up and the burial proceeded. Poppet's grandmother was laid in the earth with the oaken bowl. Cuthbertson made no effort to speak or to comfort Poppet. but he watched her. No one made mention of Mr. Granger afterwards. Aunt Lillian was also the person who stepped forward to greet the deacon and show him to where the grave had been dug, on the hill, in hard, dry ground. When Poppet asked Uncle Billy about Mr. Granger, all he would say was, again, Mr. Granger's from the old country.